Welcome to the Dental Team Podcast. I'm your host, Kira Dent, and I have this crazy idea that maybe I could combine a doctor and a team member's perspective because let's face it, dentistry can be a challenging profession with those two perspectives. I've been a dental assistant, treatment coordinator, scheduler, biller, office manager, regional manager, practice owner, and I have a team of traveling consultants where we have traveled to over 165 different offices coaching teams. Yep, we don't just understand you, we are you. Our mission is to positively impact the world of dental, and I believe that this podcast is the greatest way I can help elevate teams, grow VIP experiences, reduce stress, and create A-teams. Welcome to the Dental Team Podcast. Hello, Dental Team listeners. This is Kira, and you guys, you are in for the best treat of your life, Consultant Takeover. That's right. Get ready. They are dropping some dynamite. Our consulting team is incredible, guys, and we are so blessed and so fortunate to have them sharing tips and tricks with you today. And as always, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time on the Dental Team Podcast.
Oh, hey, Britt. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing awesome. I get to podcast with you, so it's always a good day.
I do love these days so much. We say it all the time, but I really do truly love these days. I feel like it's the one time, right before we podcast, we get to catch up on life. It's the one time you and I have one-on-one time. So I love it. I love it. And I always save some of my favorite hygiene ones for you because I love being able to do the dental assistant side and the hygiene side and wrapping them together. So I surely did that again for you today if you're ready for it.
I mean, I'm ready for it. It's always my favorite. I love putting on my hygiene hat from time to time, as I know you love putting your assistant hat on.
I do. I got to assist this. Well, kind of. I had an office I was at on Monday, and the assistant team just is struggling to really provide the doctor with what he needs, and his appointments are taking a little bit longer. He's frustrated, but he didn't know why. He's like, I don't know. They just don't know. And they don't know what they don't know, and he doesn't know what they don't know. And so it was so much fun. It filled my soul. I got to stand chairside and literally just direct her. I said, okay, with your left hand, pass this, grab that. With your right hand, grab this. And he was like, oh my gosh, this is beautiful. And she literally, it was so cool because I've done this at a couple practices, but this one obviously was this week. But I got to watch her go from this sucking spit, this is so cool to be standing here, assistant. She was beaming. Her she was literally glowing. She was so happy, and she came running out of the room afterwards and she said, Tiff, I never nobody's ever taught me that. I never knew I could do those things. Literally no one's told me to do that. And I was just oh, thank goodness, because it can go one of two ways, And she was so happy. And the rest of the day, they were just all on cloud nine. They're like, we're allowed to touch things? And I was like, yes, tell him, don't be grabby.
That's
it was so much fun.
That's what I'm here to do and help support you.
Exactly. Yeah, it was really cool. And I think, like you said, I love putting my assistant hat on, and I really, really do. And it's just, we do so much in office for so many different aspects of it. And I honestly forget sometimes that that's an aspect that we hit on because we spend so much time on the business side and the culture and the systems and protocols and duties than to stand chairside and figure out how we can save time and make a patient experience better. That's one of my favorite things to do.
I know.
It's cool.
You can do it on the assistant side. I can do a little on the assistant side, not a ton.
Yeah.
My mom taught me a few things because she is still an assistant. But
yeah.
I love doing it on the hygiene side of things that you can just speak to it. It's I've stood in your shoes and I know what's going on. And it's hey, here, I can see where you're struggling. It's if you can just bridge these gaps for doctor, right? Step in, help him bridge a few gaps. It makes everybody's life so much easier.
It's so true. It's so true. One of my other offices I was with this week, that's one of the things that we talked about, bridge the gap so that it's not awkward or uncomfortable. Do that introduction for your doctor because he or she is walking into this party that you've been having and they're just this outlier of hey, what's been going on? And it's kind of walking in on two friends, right? You have two friends that have been chatting and having so much fun together, and then they get quiet as soon as you walk into the room and you're what really is going on here? That's what I feel it feels like when you walk in a room and they're just oh, doctor's here.
Is it me? Did I interrupt at something? Am I not supposed to be here? What's going on?
Yeah, I bridge that gap, introduce them. So anyways, I love that. Those are awesome things. We do so much in office. It's so much fun. And I know I just came off of travel and you were just so amazing, Britt. You're like, take your time, like get some rest. And I love that. But I actually really love too that we're doing this podcast coming off of travel, because I'm all hyped up and like, I just did all of these amazing things with these incredible people and got to like just be in the presence of some amazing people this week. So I'm all hyped up and like ready to rock out. So thank you for being here today. And thank you for volunteering to podcast with me on an off day.
It's a privilege, Tiff.
Oh, thank you. Well, I thought today would be appropriate, especially coming off of being in practices and doing the assisting stuff. And I did work, with hygiene teams. We were doing handoffs and stuff. And I think one thing that's been coming up relevant for a lot of my practices recently, and I know I've been chatting with Danae and she's been seeing the same thing, and Dana with her calls, and I know you still have calls with clients too, and you're seeing some of these things pop up as well, of really getting that good co-diagnosis. I was chatting with the doctor this morning and he's like, my schedule just sucks. And he's like, I don't know if it's my new patients. I don't know if it's this. I'm like, well, if you're not getting a good co-diagnosis, your diagnosis will drop, right? That co-diagnosis is going to help so much. So it was like so relevant. It just keeps coming up. And I thought more people just need to hear how easy it can be, because I think we overcomplicate it. And one thing that the dental A team is really, really good at is making acronyms and making them. We make some really great acronyms. Kara's brain just is always going on that. Making acronyms and making it applicable to things that are going to increase some sort of statistic in the practice that ultimately increases the patient experience. And one of those is what would doctor do? We call it WWDD. And I hope that my 90s kids really appreciate that. And I really, really, really want like some of those rubber bracelets, because that's where the rubber bracelet thing started. I don't know if you guys remember that or not, but it was definitely started there. So what would doctor do?
Generation. So I'm like, why would they not know what that is? Like automatically in my brain when I hear it. Anyways.
Automatically, I know. But then I go into office and I say something, and all these young dental assistants fresh out of, their journey, just starting their new journey, they're just staring at me like this chick. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'll explain myself. In the 90s, a long time ago, we had these really cool things.
It's not as funny when I have to explain it, but like,
yeah, totally lost on them. That's fine. But the doctors are always like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. So we need bracelets. That's our next step. But we call it what would doctor do? And the reason we did that is because it's literally that simple. Chair side. So first off, I think co-diagnosis, to wrap that up, is not a diagnosis. This is a recommendation of things that you think doctor would want to do, and saying it in a way that's like, this is what I've seen before, right? It's noticing that there's a problem, because I think there are so many times that we as support team, right? The support team notices that there's a problem. We see this, we take an x-ray, dental assistant takes an x-ray and she's like, dang, that's a big fracture. And then walks away and doesn't say anything, So it's like, why would you not be like, wow, are you having pain on that tooth? Because I'm no doctor here, but I'm seeing something on this x-ray and I want to make sure I point it out to him. But first, like, what is this like for you? Let me ask more questions, because now the patient is more aware, right? The patient is like, this is a problem, right? You're getting the information that you can pass off to the doctor. That's your co-diagnosis, is really just bringing the awareness to the situation. And Britt, as in the hygiene chair, like, where do you see that co-diagnosis? Because dental assistant, it's like, it's usually a limited, right? It's like a limited comes in or a comp comes in and we take the x-rays, they're already telling us. But on your side, on hygiene side, you guys are like ground zero, and sometimes noticing things that you're like, did you know you had a broken tooth back here? They're like, I don't have a broken tooth. And you're like, oh, you kind of do, right? So like, how does that work on the chair, on the hygiene chair side, for that co-diagnosis to really start?
Yeah, it's huge on hygiene side, all fronts. But like hygiene, right? We see our patients back. They know us well. Like the relationship between a hygienist and their patients are usually like pretty close, or we're building that relationship so they really get to know us. And I think it's important to point that out. One, that we're building that relationship, and two, like, you think about it, if as a hygienist, if I saw like 5 things going on in this mouth and I say nothing to that patient, and then doctor comes in and says something, I'd be like, I thought we were friends. Like, what's going on here that you didn't even
Yes.
mention any of this to me? And now Doc's coming in and having to be like the bad guy and surprising me with all these things.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, like, as a hygienist, we spend the most amount of time in our patient's mouth, right? Being able to identify things that are going on. We're taking those x-rays, we're taking those photos for our patient. Like, we are going to be the ones to notice things first. And hygienists, all our team members, but hygienists, like, you know when you see something. Like, I
Yeah.
guarantee you know when you see something. So just making sure we're bringing attention to it for the patient to let them know what we are seeing. And I think some hygienists can get a little iffy on like, well, I can't diagnose things. Absolutely. You can't diagnose things. We're not asking you to diagnose anything. We're asking you to identify anything that you see and start making the patients aware of it. And it may even be like, hey, here's what I'm seeing. I want to make sure doctor takes a look at this, because sometimes when there is a darkness, it can mean that there is decay or there is a cavity there. So I want to make sure doc takes a look at it to see if it's anything that needs, that we need to worry about or that we need to go ahead and take care of for you, that type of a thing. So even if it's just bringing attention, then there's those things that you're like, I know for sure there's something that's gonna have to happen for this tooth. Absolutely. Those ones I can speak a little bit stronger to, of like, hey, here's what I'm seeing. I know doctor's gonna take a look at it and want to be aware of it. Just want to let you know it's there. Often when I see this, it might mean that there is a cavity there, there is decay there. Doctor will come and take a look and confirm it. If it is a cavity, it may need to be filled, or depending on the size, I always like to give patients a heads up and allow them to go through like those emotions of change and realizing something is happening. So if it's going to be something bigger, like a crown of like, hey, that does look like a pretty decent spot, or there's a large filling there and I see there's some darkness around it. If something needs to be done for it, it may need something like a crown to be able to hold that tooth together, to get you a more stable like restoration on there. Doctor's for sure going to take a look at it. I'll make sure he takes a look and determines what we need to do for it. So play through scenarios in your brain. Like, there's some small ones that might be, bring attention to it. Something might need to happen, or like for sure something needs to happen. How can I talk through it to bring some attention and let them know what might need to be done for it?
Yeah, I love that. And that right there is the what would doctor do, right? So when you're seeing something like that chairside, really thinking, what would doctor typically do in this scenario or this situation? And I think you mentioned like bringing the awareness to it, mentioning it, bringing that awareness up so that the patients aren't jostled, I think is a good word, right? When doctor comes in and he's like, oh my gosh, you have a whole broken tooth. And it's like, I would do the same thing. I'd be like, girlfriend, I would literally look at you like that. Like, Britt, we have been here. I have seen you. Like, even on my first appointment, I would be like, we've been here for an hour. And like, I had no idea that this was coming. So it's a shock value. And I think that it does a couple of things. I personally think it decreases when you allow that to happen. I think it decreases the patient experience, because I think that then the patient's already uncomfortable. I'm sorry, doctors, but you are not a comfortable person to come in and like they're waiting for you to tell them bad news. And so they're already in a state of like uber awareness. So they're already uncomfortable. Now you just shocked them. Now they're even more uncomfortable. They're confused. They're going through the doubts. They're having to go through all of those emotions as soon as doctor says it. And so their patient experience can be increased by being given the opportunity to go through some of those emotions and ask some of those questions before doctor comes in. And then doctor comes in and confirms it, or says, sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, I do see that. I think I want to watch it. That's totally fine too. We'll talk a little bit about that. But I think bringing that awareness actually increases the patient experience, where a lot of hygienists I've chatted with that have been against something like this, they like to say things like, well, it's not for me. My patient doesn't want to hear it from me. It's scary. Doctor doesn't always agree, kind of things like that. But I really do think that it increases the patient experience. And I think it decreases the amount of time the doctor has to stay in your room. Hygienists, I love you. But one of the biggest things I hear is either he doesn't get to me in time, or she spends too much time talking. Well, guess what? What is in your control? That's in your control. If you can prep and already have some of these conversations with your patients before he or she gets in the room, he or she is going to spend less time in the room having the conversations because your patients already know.
That's one of my favorite things, Tiff. Like, if anything, like that's one of my favorite things is patient experience, absolutely, and efficiency. Then I'm like, what can I do to make it as smooth as possible? And those times when it's like, yeah, doc and hygiene, like we're just clicking, we're just moving along. And the better you get at this, the more you're going to feel that like we're just clicking and we're moving along. And I want to kind of chime in a little bit with hygienists. I want you to think about it. Us doing this to help doctor reverse the roles. It's like when doctors talk about perio or don't talk about perio, when it's like, I just spent 20 minutes talking about perio, doc comes in, it's like, great, everything looks fine. Like, it's like the equivalent to me. If I say nothing and doc comes in and has to say everything, it's like when doc does that to me. When I've talked perio and they come in and like, great, awesome, everything's good to go, and mention nothing about like this 10 millimeter pocket that's sitting there.
I love that. I am using that. That was brilliant. I love it. And it makes me think too of how frustrated, which I would be too, is how frustrated hygienists get when a new patient starts on doctor and they come over for a prophy and it's never just a prophy. Like, there's always something else. So I loved that. That was so smart, Britt. I love that.
So that's the how we help each other. Like that's the symbiotic relationship between the two of us and how we work together. Like, yes, I'm focusing on perio. Doctor's always going to be confirming and diagnosing, but like I want him to help me out in the perio realm too. Like this is how I help him back, him or her.
I love that. I love that. Good job. Good job. All right. So what would doctor do is literally what would doctor do? So when you're seeing something, what would doctor typically do in this scenario? He would mention it. Is it a case where you can confidently say, like, oftentimes in this scenario, I see up to potentially a crown. Have you ever heard of a crown? I always really liked as a dental assistant to like worst case scenario it. And I know it's a rabbit hole and sometimes you can like, I don't want to freak people out. Well, I would much rather be like, hey, this is a little bit on the bigger side. So while he may be able to do a filling, he'll tell you, but like, I want to talk to you about a crown just in case we get to that point, because I would hate to be like, oh, we probably just, I've seen him do a lot of fillings that are this size and he comes in, he's like, this is massive, it needs a crown. Now we're still at the same situation. You might as well not said anything. So what would doctor do? Like, try to make your best judgment. If you're not comfortable saying treatment, then don't say treatment. I'm totally open to that. Again, this is mentioning it and bringing up that awareness. It does not mean that you have to know exactly what he or she is going to do. And also, caveat to that, it doesn't mean that they're always going to agree with you. Your doctor might come in and you might say, hey, I noticed on this tooth there's a dark spot. We kind of talked about potentially decay if you see that. I told her maybe a filling. And they may be like, oh, you know what? Actually, it's just a shadow on the x-ray. You're like, oh, thank goodness. A lot of us like to take that personally, and we take it as we're wrong. And he or she doesn't ever want us to say that again because we looked a certain way in front of the patient. It's typically not the case, you guys. I always took it as, oh, thank goodness. I was worried and I know I got her freaked out, but guess what? We're all in the clear. And they're like, oh, good. So then when he's like, but this tooth over here that you mentioned does need a crown, they're like, okay. Like, I'm glad it's just the one, right? Sometimes it's going to work out that it's everything you saw, but sometimes it's not. Or sometimes I would just ask a question of like, hey, doctor, I saw this. And I'm actually not sure what it is. I let her know, like, I do see something here, but it could just be an anomaly. Have those conversations with the doctor. You guys are learning together and you're learning each other over time. I knew my doctor like the back of my hand, right? I worked with him for years and I always knew. And then one day he's like, no, I think I'm gonna do this. And I'm like, what? I've never heard you say those words before in my life. We're constantly changing. We're constantly evolving. We're learning new things. We're learning new techniques. And we have to be open to the idea that things are going to change and their diagnosis isn't always going to be the same. It should be fairly consistent so that it is semi-predictable, but you have to be open to the fact that we're all changing and growing together. So there's still going to be a learning curve there. So
and I think
calibrate.
Always come in with like your pivot things that you can say, right?
Yeah.
It's going to happen. I say, even like with phone, and like over time, you'll get creative with your verbiage on things. And any way that I can make my team, my doctor, the patient, the hero, I'm going to do it. So like in that situation, like, I'm not going to take it personally. I'm like, awesome. Like, Dr. Tiff is the best. So like, great. I'm glad that there's nothing that needs to be done. And she would know if there is something that needs to be done. So anytime you can highlight them, like take it as a chance to, instead of like, oh my gosh, I made a mistake, which people can get nervous over, like, I did my job in trying to prep him, and that's where doctor is the diagnosis and make him the hero. That great news, like awesome. Or if it's like we talked about crown or filling, I'm like, fantastic. If it doesn't have to be a crown, I love that Dr. Tiff is going to be able to take care of it with a filling.
Exactly. Totally. I love that. All right. So how do we get prepped, you guys, to be able to do something like this, to be able to implement this? Because I know I have a lot of doctors who listen on here. I've got a ton of team members too, but I was just in my practice yesterday. And one of the first things that the associate dentist said to me, I said, oh, I've been in dentistry for this long. I do this, I do the consulting, whatever. She goes, and you're on the podcast. And I said, ooh, you're listening. So I know we have so many doctors and associate doctors, all those people on here, and they're like, these are really great tips, but like, how do we do it? And that's something that Dental A Team, I think, does differently, is we definitely make sure that we have the actionable pieces always there for you. So how do you implement something like what would doctor do, that co-diagnosis? First and foremost, I think you guys need to get on the same page. So doctors, have a meeting with your team, with your dental assistants and your hygienists, and really define, what does co-diagnosis mean in your practice? What do you, as a doctor, as the provider, what do you want that to look like for you? Take some of our suggestions, take our pieces, and you guys run with it and create what works for your practice. So schedule a team meeting. I would do it within the next 2 weeks because this is fresh on your mind. I want you to get it rolling. So figure out the protocol for that. What does co-diagnosis mean for you? And then from there, I would schedule calibration meetings with your team, dental assistants and hygienists, and just have those maybe like once a month. Britt, do you think like once a month, kind of having that conversation of like, how has it been? You can look at cases, and then guys, start tracking the metrics that go behind this. The metrics that you will see increase with co-diagnosis are diagnosis up. So you'll diagnose more treatment because your awareness is more present to where you're at. It's not because they diagnosed it for you and told you what to diagnose. They brought you present to the room by transferring the information to you. Your brain is not in a million other different places. You are present in the room that you're at, and you're diagnosing better because you're here in the now. So do not take it as your team is telling you what to diagnose, and don't only diagnose what your team is saying. It is to bring you present, okay? So build the protocol, figure out what that looks like, schedule out some calibration meetings, and really just get that center focus going on what you want that to be.
I like what you said on like getting it implemented. Like it would be a good thing like every month. And as you guys get stronger, then it's something that we'll check in on. And this can be calibration if it's even like quarterly. Make sure you go through some cases, and it can be perio and it can be restorative, right? Look at it. Let's calibrate. Let's look and see what would we do in these situations.
Yeah, I love that. And I think if you're doing it monthly, then shift to where it is quarterly later, because I think only monthly doctor calibration meetings are really necessary to continue. So yeah, I love that. So metrics should be, diagnosis should be up, and then your case acceptance should be up. You guys, your patients should be more willing to accept the treatment because they've heard it multiple times with that co-diagnosis. So watch those two metrics. So build your protocol. What do you want that to look like for you? Schedule the meetings, and then track your metrics. If you're not tracking the metrics and you're just arbitrarily creating new systems and implementing new things, how do you know that it's even working or changing the game? You're just changing things to change them. So make sure you're tracking those metrics. Look at your diagnosis, look at your case acceptance, look at your production and your scheduled appointments. All right. Those are your action items, you guys. I hope you wrote them down, because I surely did. I'm constantly writing notes over here.
And then when you guys meet and go through that, what would doctor do? I think let's break it down a little bit more, Tiff, on like go through the procedures that you do within your office, right? Go through like, if you see X, right, then I would do Y, right? Like what the options are, like walk through all the different procedures so that the team kind of really starts to know. And just understand that this is helpful. I'm going to plug it in a couple ways. One, it just helps with our current team and absolutely case acceptance, getting our schedule full, but also it's going to help when you onboard new associates, right? When I'm really confident with my co-diagnosing and I know it, it's real easy for an associate to come in, for my team to help support them as they kind of get to understand our philosophy. So.
I love that. I totally agree. And then I think that as you have those associates come in, that's more calibration, and that's where the communication with the team and the doctors really comes in. So reach out to us when that comes up, because that's a whole nother podcast episode. But take these things. This was awesome, Britt. Thank you so much. I knew we could really get nitty gritty with this one. And we had a ton of time today. So this was fantastic. It was super fun. I appreciate you being here.
Absolutely.
All right, guys, you know what the wrap up is. That's it. That's a wrap. Go do what would doctor do. Get yourself some bracelets if you feel inclined. Let us know how that works out for you. Have so much fun with it. Let us know how it goes. You can email us at hello@thedental-ateam.com. You guys, we really do love hearing from you. You can ask questions, but celebrate your wins with us. Let us know how this goes for you. And also, you can let other listeners know too by dropping a 5-star review below. I'm telling you guys, they really do help, because when you listen to these things, you implement it and you're like, holy cow, this actually worked. This is what I did. Then people who are thinking about listening to this and they look through those comments, they're going to see that and they're going to say, oh my gosh, okay, great. Let me take what they said and what this doctor said, and they're going to combine it. So drop us a review down below. We love to hear from you guys, and email us. We will catch you next time. Thanks, guys.
That wraps it up for another episode of the Dental A Team podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.